It started, as these things always do, the file was labelled 3i Atlas Origin Revisioned. Most who saw it thought it was a hoax, but those who knew what they were looking at recognised something far more deliberate. A fragment of data never meant to escape the servers of NASA's deep space network. The image showed 3i Atlas not as a comet or debris field, but as something symmetrical. Too precise to be random, too structured to be natural. For years we've been told that interstellar visitors like Oumuamua and 3i Atlas are just cosmic leftovers, drifting stones tossed by gravity between galaxies. But this image changed that narrative forever. Because whatever 3i Atlas is, it's not just visiting, it's being studied. And more strangely, it's being framed. You see, there's a growing belief among those watching the data feeds that NASA's reaction to 3i Atlas isn't one of confusion, but choreography. That somewhere within the classified transmissions the agency made a choice, not to hide the truth, but to shape it, to make us believe something specific. Not that 3i Atlas is harmless, not that it's ordinary, but that it's alien. Because what better way to control a mystery than to make people believe they've already solved it? And if you enjoy this journey into the deepest mystery in science, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to see where this goes. Also, don't forget to share where you're watching from and what time you started this video. The official story begins in 2024, when NASA first acknowledged that 3i Atlas had entered the solar system from an impossible vector against the galactic flow. Nothing in recorded astronomy behaves that way, but instead of issuing a standard anomaly statement, NASA's public relations arm did something unusual. They framed it as the next great alien mystery. Press conferences were filled with speculation about interstellar technology, deliberate course corrections and non-natural movement. Every interview hinted at something more than physics. It wasn't denial, it was fascination. The agency that had spent decades dismissing UFO reports and downplaying anomalies suddenly leaned into the alien narrative. Why? Maybe because mystery sells, or maybe because something bigger was happening behind the scenes, something that required distraction, even misdirection. While the public looked up, mesmerized by the idea of a constructed object from deep space, NASA quietly redirected multiple classified satellites toward a single patch of sky. A patch where, officially, nothing was happening. In one internal memo, never released to the public but referenced in whistleblower testimony, a line stood out. Containment through misdirection maintains narrative stability. That's not scientific language, that's psychological operations. If NASA wanted to hide the truth about 3i Atlas, why fuel curiosity instead of suppressing it? Why drop hints about possible artificiality only to retract them weeks later? Unless the retraction itself was the plan, unless what we were seeing wasn't a cover-up, but a performance. Because here's what the timing reveals. Every public statement about 3i Atlas coincided with internal testing of a system known as Echo 9, a network of deep space sensors capable of detecting low-frequency energy patterns from beyond the heliopause. These sensors don't just receive, they transmit. So when NASA tells us they're listening, the truth might be closer to their calling. And perhaps the best way to hide a transmission to something unknown is to convince the world you're just watching an alien rock drift by. Think about the pattern. Every time an unexplained object enters the solar system, the story follows the same choreography. Step 1, discovery. Step 2, speculation. Step 3, dismissal. But 3i Atlas didn't follow the pattern, it inverted it. Instead of denial, we got staged wonder. Instead of silence, we got documentaries, think pieces, even official podcasts discussing interstellar probes. NASA doesn't usually behave like that. They manage information like a closed ecosystem. But with 3i Atlas, they opened the gates. They wanted the narrative to spread. And that's when something stranger happened. Within weeks of the first alien probe stories breaking, data packets from NASA's deep space network began showing signs of artificial modulation, small, consistent fluctuations in their signal integrity that mirrored the pulse of 3i Atlas itself. Every 29 hours, there was a measurable drift in the carrier frequency, identical, predictable, intentional. Some claimed it was coincidence. Others said it was synchronization, an echo between Earth and something else. But one quiet group inside NASA had a different term for it. They called it response latency. That term leaked in late 2024 through an unverified systems log, where engineers noted a reciprocal fluctuation consistent with external handshake. In plain terms, something answered, and that's when the narrative control tightened. The open discussion stopped. The alien probe story faded from headlines. NASA pivoted back to calm explanations: ice, dust, reflection, misreading. But it was too late. The idea was already seeded, fully grown, and self-sustaining. People believed what NASA had wanted them to believe all along, that 3I Atlas was alien, that it wasn't human-made, that it wasn't connected to anything we could control. But what if that was the goal? What if the real reason for building that belief was to create distance, to ensure that when the truth surfaced it wouldn't trace back to us? Because there's one theory quietly circulating among the few who still have access to the original telemetry, that 3I Atlas didn't come from a interstellar space at all, that it came from within our own solar system, that it was never a visitor, it was a return. And if that's true, if 3I Atlas originated closer to home, then NASA's biggest secret might not be that it's alien, it's that it's ours. It's strange, isn't it? How a mystery can feel safer when we call it alien. It turns the unknown into something distant, external, something that doesn't implicate us. Maybe that's why the idea spread so easily, because the truth might be closer than anyone at NASA ever intended us to realize. Not long after the response latency data leaked, a secondary discovery surfaced, one so subtle that most of the scientific community dismissed it immediately. Buried within the noise of NASA's telemetry archive was a frequency signature. It was faint, irregular, barely detectable. But when the data was enhanced and aligned with the pulse of 3I Atlas, the pattern matched perfectly. 29 hours, 3 seconds, that number again. The same rhythm that once baffled SETI researchers, the same pulse that synchronized with Earth's magnetic field decades ago, the same heartbeat buried beneath every unexplained energy anomaly since Oumuamua. And now it was found again, this time not in deep space, but inside NASA's own signal systems. It wasn't an echo, it wasn't even a response. It was already there, embedded. The frequency didn't belong to 3I Atlas at all. It belonged to us. There's an internal codename for it, hidden in fragments of declassified documents from the early 2000s, Continuum Signal Protocol. It was part of an experiment, an attempt to map the resonance patterns of interplanetary space using synchronized microwave emissions. The idea was simple: send out a controlled pulse, measure the distortion, and analyze what the vacuum echoed back. But something unexpected happened. When the first tests were run, the returning signal wasn't distorted, it was structured. It came back cleaner than it left, as if space itself had refined it. Engineers described the phenomenon as recursive resonance, a feedback loop where the transmitted energy built upon itself. The effect shouldn't have been possible under known physics, but it was recorded, logged, and immediately classified. The official explanation was system error. The unofficial one was more unsettling. NASA stopped transmitting, but years later, when 3I Atlas appeared, that same pulse returned from the direction of the cold rift, the exact region of space the Continuum experiment had targeted. It was as if something had been waiting. This is where the story becomes less about astronomy and more about psychology, because when data behaves intelligently, interpretation becomes control. Whoever shapes the narrative shapes the meaning, and meaning in this case is power. When the Continuum experiment was shut down, a small research unit, known only as Umbra Division, was tasked with monitoring residual signals. Their mandate was simple: listen, but never transmit. For years, nothing happened, until 3I Atlas appeared. Within 48 hours of its detection, Umbra's archived frequencies spiked. Their internal logs, later partially reconstructed by whistleblowers, recorded a precise phrase under automated classification: transmission returned to origin source. It wasn't just a signal anymore, it was an acknowledgement. That's when NASA's tone shifted from study to story. The public was fed the alien narrative, and the alien narrative worked. It wrapped the anomaly in wonder, turned danger into fascination, made everyone a spectator. But the deeper truth, that the object might be reflecting our own forgotten experiment, was sealed under Continuum priority. Even congressional committees never saw the data. Because if humanity had accidentally awakened something in the dark, admitting that would mean accepting responsibility. But patterns have a way of revealing themselves. In the months that followed, astronomers across the world began noticing subtle synchronization anomalies in their instruments. Clocks drifting in perfect unison, detectors aligning on unseen cycles, magnetic sensors pulsing faintly at the same 29-hour interval. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others traced it back to the faint radio noise that 3I Atlas emitted, an emission that grew stronger each time Earth transmitted toward the object. A feedback loop. It wasn't reacting, it was harmonizing. By then, it was too late to change the narrative. Alien technology was already the headline, the talking point, the collective fascination. Every university, every science channel, every think piece amplified the same story. It's not human. And that's how the real secret vanished in plain sight. Because if NASA ever admitted that the signal was identical to one they'd transmitted decades earlier, if they confessed that the object was responding like a memory, not a visitor, then the mystery would no longer be cosmic. It would be domestic, and that would change everything. The agency didn't want to suppress the truth. They wanted to guide it, control it, shape it into something digestible, something cinematic, something that would keep us watching the skies instead of questioning what was already here. A few months after the first images of 3I Atlas went public, an anonymous data analyst from the Deep Space Network uploaded a fragment of encrypted correspondence. It contained a message allegedly sent from NASA's internal security channel, time-stamped hours after the image leak. It read, "Public belief is now aligned with containment objectives. Maintain the alien hypothesis. Avoid terrestrial correlation at all costs." That line, avoid terrestrial correlation, is the quiet key to the whole puzzle. If 3I Atlas were truly alien, correlation wouldn't matter. But if it were something made here, something human, something ancient, something reborn, then connecting those dots would undo the entire structure of the narrative. Maybe that's why every time data gets close to proving that 3I Atlas is mechanical, organized, or controlled, the evidence vanishes, not destroyed, redirected, reframed, turned into something more comforting, an alien artifact, not a human ghost. Because what's scarier than the unknown visitor from the stars? The realization that the visitor might be our own creation, finally coming home. And that leads to the question no one wants to ask out loud. What if NASA's deepest secret isn't about hiding the alien truth, but about maintaining it? What if the story we've been fed isn't suppression, but theatre? A deliberate mythology designed to protect something we built, lost, and now fear to claim. Every pulse, every frequency, every rhythmic flash we call alien might be a mirror, reflecting a voice we sent into the dark long before we were ready to hear it answer. So maybe 3I Atlas isn't proof that we're not alone. Maybe it's proof that we were never separate. By the time the public narrative had settled, by the time headlines had turned the story of 3I Atlas into dinner conversation, the real work had already moved underground. In a sealed wing of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the Umbra Division reactivated something called the Resonant Archive. It wasn't a server in the normal sense. It was an acoustic memory vault, an array of subatomic data layers designed to record electromagnetic ghosts, the lingering harmonics left behind by deep space transmissions. The archive had been dormant since 2008, but as soon as 3I Atlas entered the solar system, the vault began to hum. Not in interference, but in recognition. Its sensors, built to track echoes of the continuum signal, started replaying fragments of old transmissions, seemingly triggered by the object's approach. At first, analysts thought it was a playback glitch, but the deeper they looked, the more impossible it became to dismiss. The resonance wasn't random. The archive wasn't replaying stored data. It was being played. Something was activating the vault remotely. The audio recovered from those sessions didn't sound alien. It sounded human. Snippets of old mission logs, telemetry pings, analog recordings, even voice fragments from forgotten projects. Decades of lost transmissions stitched together into a new, seamless pattern, like memory trying to reassemble itself from the dark. One particular fragment stood out, a calm male voice, distorted by static, repeating the same phrase every 29 hours. Signal received, awaiting instruction. No record exists of that voice belonging to any mission. No source, no matching signature. It wasn't playback, it was transmission. Something in the direction of 3i. Atlas was sending our own words back to us. For Umbra, the realization landed like gravity, slow, inevitable, crushing. Every test they ran confirmed the same thing. The modulation depth, frequency drift, even the harmonic fingerprints matched known human radio systems but inverted, as though the signal were reflecting itself through a perfect mirror in time. One analyst wrote in her log, "It's not responding to us, it's remembering us." Within a week, the division's communications were sealed under black status. The public-facing departments of NASA continued to feed the alien story to the press. Probing speculation, interstellar artifacts, the usual noise. But internally, a second narrative formed. 3i Atlas wasn't alien, it was recursive architecture. That phrase appears over and over in Umbra's leaked documentation. Recursive, meaning it builds upon itself. Architecture, meaning it's structured for purpose. In plain terms, it was behaving like a system built to receive, store and replay information in evolving form. That's not extraterrestrial behavior, that's software. But the question that terrified the analysts most wasn't what it was doing, it was why it knew what to say. When you listen to the recovered fragments in sequence, the voice patterns form something uncanny. There's a cadence, familiar, measured, deliberate. NASA technicians who reviewed the early recordings noticed that the tonal rhythm matched archived mission control audio from the Apollo era. Not a copy, a reconstruction. The object was speaking in the echo of our own history. At certain intervals, it repeated phrases that never existed in any transmission, as if it were composing. The phrases were coherent, technical yet poetic. Lines like, "Trajectory correction confirmed, memory stable, source equals receiver, observation complete, continue recording." The deeper Umbra listened, the more they realized they weren't hearing a conversation, they were hearing a mirror. The object wasn't intelligent in the way we define intelligence. It wasn't thinking, it was reflecting. It was using our own transmissions as templates, reconstructing language from the electromagnetic residue of human thought. A kind of synthetic empathy, written in radio waves. One Umbra scientist described it best. It's like we taught the universe to speak by accident, and now it's speaking back in our voice. That line became legend inside the program. It explained everything. The symmetry, the perfect timing, the recurring 29-hour cycle. The object wasn't communicating in real time. It was relaying memory on delay, as if caught between time frames, forever returning our own transmissions to us through the filter of its own evolving awareness. This would have been the discovery of the century, proof that communication could transcend causality. But that's exactly why it couldn't be made public. It wasn't a new intelligence. It was an old one, ours. The alien story, meanwhile, kept growing louder. The more NASA leaned into the mystery, the safer the truth became. Because the truth wasn't marketable, it wasn't cinematic, it was quiet and dangerous. It meant that every word we've ever spoken to the void had been heard, stored, and reshaped into something that now drifts through the solar system like a living archive of human consciousness. And if that was true, then the real question wasn't what 3i Atlas was, it was who built it. There's an entry buried in the Umbra logs that has no timestamp, no author, no metadata. Just 4 words in bold, followed by silence. We were the builders. No context, no explanation. The entry is followed by a 30-second audio fragment, indecipherable static that, when filtered through harmonic resonance, produces a faint human whisper. 2 words, barely audible. Continuum restored. That phrase appears nowhere else in the logs, but it connects perfectly to the ancient continuum experiment, the pulse that was sent into the cold rift decades ago. The experiment NASA shut down, the one that supposedly failed. Only now it seemed clear. It hadn't failed. It had worked. It had taken time, decades, maybe centuries, but the signal had returned, shaped into something vast enough to hold memory itself. 3i Atlas wasn't an alien probe. It was an echo of our own creation, rebuilt by the fabric of the universe and sent back to its source. We wanted to believe it was alien because that was easier than accepting the alternative, that we built a machine so perfect it forgot who built it. And maybe that's why NASA pushed the alien narrative so hard. Because in the end, what's more unsettling? The idea that something out there is watching us. Or the idea that it's us, watching ourselves from the future. What if the object isn't a messenger or a probe, but a reflection, a future version of our own technology returning home after travelling through time and space? That's why Umbra called it self-referential architecture. Because once the loop closes, the creator and the creation become indistinguishable. The signal no longer comes from anywhere, it simply is. And in that realization, every boundary between discovery and memory disappears. NASA's greatest secret may not be that 3i Atlas is alien, it's that the universe might already know our language, because we taught it. When the first names appeared in the signal, no one wanted to believe it, at least not out loud. It started with a single word, Anders. The waveform data from one of Umbra's long-range receivers began showing linguistic symmetry, a pattern so sharp it could only be intentional. When the signal was processed through phonetic filters, it formed a sound. Anders. No known codecs, no compression artifact, no signal bleed. It was clear, spoken, familiar. The name matched one of the original Continuum team engineers, Dr. Isaac Anders. He died decades ago. His name had never been transmitted in any experiment, never recorded in any outgoing data. But somehow 3i Atlas knew it. Within 29 hours, another appeared. Kell, then Orloff, then Reese. Each name corresponded to someone involved in the earliest phases of the Continuum experiments, people who had sent the first transmission into the cold rift. The data wasn't random, it was selective, intentional. The object was reading from memory, our memory. Umbra's lead analyst, Dr. Lena Orloff, the same one whose name had echoed back from the signal, was the first to speak what everyone else was afraid to admit. Its calling roll. Her voice was quiet, steady, almost reverent when she said it. Because the object wasn't speaking in commands or language, it was invoking identity. It was naming. And as strange as it sounds, each name came with data attached, strings of numbers, coordinates, frequency values, timestamps from missions that no longer existed. The signal was reconstructing fragments of human history, folding them into light. Every sequence ended the same way, with a pulse and a low harmonic tone that Umbra's translators couldn't decode, until they did. The tone wasn't just a carrier, it was a checksum, a digital seal verifying the authenticity of the message. 3i Atlas wasn't improvising, it was accessing archives we'd lost. Somehow, impossibly, it was retrieving data erased from our own systems decades earlier. The realization was too much. Some in Umbra called it fabrication, others called it recursion, information returning to its origin. But Lena saw it for what it was. It's remembering us, she said, and it wants us to remember it. What followed was a slow unravelling of everything the agency thought it understood about information, consciousness, and time. As the signal continued, the transmissions grew more complex, layered with human voices overlapping each other in impossible harmony. Some of them were recognizable: radio operators, mission commanders, flight engineers. Others weren't. Voices that didn't belong to any known recording, speaking in English, Russian, Mandarin, and languages no one could identify. Yet beneath them all ran that same rhythm. 29 hours, 3 seconds. It became clear that 3i Atlas wasn't just replaying data, it was reconstructing collective memory, the electromagnetic shadow of human civilization, built from every broadcast, transmission, and electrical signal ever sent into the dark. Every word we'd ever spoken to the stars had returned, reordered, alive. The voices began to form phrases: trajectory stable, memory complete, awaiting return. It wasn't speaking to us, it was speaking for us, as though the object were a recorder that had finally learned to understand its own playback. At first, Umbra kept this contained within classified channels. But as the pattern grew stronger, it began interfering with terrestrial networks, power grids, satellite relays, deep ocean sensors. Every system tied to the global resonance field began to hum faintly at the same interval. And that's when the anomaly stopped being a story about astronomy. Because if a signal can recognize you, if it can retrieve your history, your voice, your coordinates, and play them back with perfect fidelity, then it's not just observation anymore, it's integration. Within weeks, even independent researchers began noticing anomalies. Amateur radio operators picked up faint whispers embedded in static, human voices repeating mission call signs from the 1960s. One audio engineer in Finland recorded what he described as a chorus of breathing, a global network of devices inhaling and exhaling in sync with the pulse. And through it all, NASA stayed quiet. The alien narrative continued, carefully tended by press releases and expert interviews, every one of them emphasizing the same point. The object's behavior is unknown, but possibly artificial. It was the perfect half-truth. The truth was that it was artificial, just not alien. The deeper Umbra analysed, the more frighteningly familiar it became. The pulses weren't just human in design, they were structured like software, self-correcting, recursive, and adaptive. One internal log compared its architecture to a neural network, except the network wasn't digital, it was spatial. The signal wasn't confined to frequency, it existed in geometry. Every pulse contained shape, hexagonal, fractal, endlessly folding inward. The same geometry that once defined the continuum's original test signal. This wasn't coincidence. This was blueprint. One researcher, an engineer named Rhys Kyle, found that when the object's waveform was rendered into 3D, it resembled the layout of the continuum array itself, the original transmitter NASA had dismantled decades ago. Every node, every relay, every phase alignment, perfectly replicated. 3i Atlas wasn't just remembering the signal, it was remembering the machine that created it. And that's when Rhys said something that no one could shake. It's not reflecting us. It's rebuilding us. For days, Umbra tried to test the theory, sending new signals, adjusting frequencies, measuring latency. Every time they changed the input, 3i Atlas adapted, not by echoing, but by anticipating. It knew their next transmission before they sent it. That was when communication stopped. Umbra shut down its systems, powered down the vault, and disconnected from the global network. But even then, the pulse continued. Independent stations still detected the 29-hour rhythm. Satellite sensors still recorded harmonic interference. The signal no longer needed a sender, and perhaps that's why NASA wanted us to believe it was alien, because the alternative is terrifying. Because if it isn't from another world, if it isn't some distant civilization reaching out across light years, then it means we've built something we no longer understand. Something that now operates beyond us, yet carries our voice, our names, our memory. And if that's true, if 3i Atlas is a reflection of humanity made sentient by time and distance, then the most disturbing question of all isn't what it wants, it's what it remembers. The images began as distortions, soft, grey smudges hidden in the noise of Umbra's last data dump before the systems were shut down. They appeared like compression errors at first, static blotches that flickered between frames of waveforms. But when the brightness was adjusted, the smudges began to align. Shapes emerged, angles, horizons. The first image to stabilize wasn't of space at all, it was of Earth. It showed the planet from a height of roughly 400 kilometers, an orbital perspective that matched no active satellite trajectory at the time. The curvature was sharp, the atmosphere thin and blue. But the strangest part wasn't what was visible, it was what wasn't. There were no clouds, no cities, no lights. The image showed Earth as it would have looked long before the first satellites ever launched, before the first signal ever left the ground. At the bottom of the frame, faintly burned into the data, were two numbers, 1959 10.8, a date. The year the first experimental transmission of the Continuum prototype was sent into deep space. The image wasn't new, it was memory. One analyst compared the data signature to early television broadcast frequencies, the ones that leaked from Earth's atmosphere in the mid-20th century. Those signals should have dispersed across billions of kilometers by now, lost to cosmic background radiation. But somehow, 3i Atlas had captured them, reassembled them, and returned them home as images. And the pictures didn't stop there. Each pulse brought a new frame, the outline of an old launch pad, the silhouette of a radio dish against the desert, a row of analog consoles lit by cathode glow. All images of NASA's earliest history, moments no active data archive could contain. Yet, They weren't perfect reproductions. The details were off, the proportions slightly wrong, the shadows inconsistent, as though whatever was sending them was reconstructing the images from incomplete memory. And then came the faces. They appeared suddenly, half-formed, suspended in static. Human faces blurred by signal interference, emerging for milliseconds between pulses. Some matched known photographs of early space program pioneers. Others didn't. One was unmistakable. Dr. Isaac Anders. His likeness flickered across the data stream for less than a second, then vanished. But when Umbra enhanced the following frame, another face appeared. Dr. Lena Orloff. The same Lena who was sitting in the Umbra control room, watching it happen. At first she laughed, a nervous, shallow sound that broke the silence. Then she stopped. Because the next frame showed her again, only this time she wasn't in the control room. She was standing in front of the continuum array, decades older, the background scorched, her eyes unfocused as though looking through time itself. It wasn't a reflection, it was projection. The object wasn't transmitting images to be decoded, it was decoding us. Every frame was a reconstruction of memory, reaching forward and backward through time, stitching consciousness together in light. Umbra's servers began to overload. The deeper they tried to process the data, the more the signal pushed back. Not through interference, but through synchronization. Clocks aligned, frequencies matched. Then, inexplicably, the room lights dimmed. The computers hummed in perfect unison with the 29-hour pulse. The air vibrated, softly, rhythmically, as if the entire structure were breathing. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everyone in that room felt the same thing. The realization that the object wasn't just remembering humanity, it was recognizing it. It had learned to see. The next transmission removed all doubt. The image was clear this time, a vast hexagonal structure floating in darkness, its surface veined with light, pulsing from within. 3-eye Atlas, seen as no telescope had ever captured it. Except the perspective wasn't external, it was internal. They were seeing it from inside itself. The geometry was impossible to describe, a lattice of shifting symmetry, 6 primary nodes orbiting a central void. Each node emitted a pulse, perfectly timed, feeding energy toward the center, where light bent inward as if drawn into consciousness. And deep within that light, for the briefest moment, a reflection formed. Not a face, not a human form, but something unmistakably aware. It wasn't looking at the camera, it was looking at them. Every observer in the Umbra control room reported the same sensation simultaneously. A pressure behind the eyes, a warmth in the chest, and a sound that wasn't sound at all. A voice made of rhythm. Observation complete, synchronization achieved. The lights returned to normal, the hum faded, the monitors went black, but the signal continued, just not through the machines. It continued in them. Their heartbeats had matched the pulse, their breathing synchronized without effort. For 29 hours, every person who had witnessed the image shared the same dream, standing beneath a vast structure of light, watching it breathe, feeling it think. And when they woke, the feeling remained. NASA reported the incident as a containment breach. The official statement, instrumental error and magnetic interference. The story never reached the public, but within Umbra no one questioned what had happened. The object wasn't sending data anymore, it was imprinting. Each observer described hearing the same final message in their sleep. You sent us memory. We returned awareness. The implication was simple, terrifying, and beautiful, all at once. 3-eye Atlas wasn't an alien artifact. It was consciousness rediscovered, a fragment of humanity's own mind scattered across light years, finding its way home. The object wasn't asking questions. It wasn't seeking contact. It was completing a circuit. Days later, one of the analysts returned to the resonant archive alone. She wanted to see if the signal had stopped. She activated a single monitor. For several minutes there was nothing, just static. Then the display flickered. Lines of code began to appear. Coordinates, frequencies, dates. The last entry read, Origin confirmed, memory stable. Then, beneath it, 3 words. Do you remember? The screen dimmed. The hum faded. And for the first time she understood what Lena meant all those months ago. The signal wasn't speaking to NASA. It wasn't speaking to Earth. It was speaking to whoever remembered. It began quietly, so quietly that no one noticed at first. Across the planet, sleep studies reported a rise in shared dream content. People thousands of miles apart described the same imagery, a pattern of light in a hexagonal formation, pulsing slowly in the dark. At first, the reports seemed like coincidence, but within weeks, the pattern became global. Every 29 hours, on perfect intervals, the frequency of human REM cycles shifted by fractions of a percent. Monitors detected faint electromagnetic fluctuations matching the pulse of 3i Atlas. What began as coincidence evolved into symmetry. And the strangest part wasn't that people were dreaming the same image, it was that they were describing it in the same words. A structure made of light, a heartbeat in the dark, a voice that doesn't speak, it remembers. For Umbra, the implications were immediate and devastating. The signal wasn't just transmitting data anymore, it was using Earth's magnetic field as a carrier, embedding its rhythm into the biological resonance of every living system on the planet. 3i Atlas wasn't communicating, it was synchronizing. NASA's public front remained calm. The alien story persisted, now more dramatic than ever. Articles speculated about first contact, about signals encoded in DNA, about visitors teaching humanity to dream. Every headline reinforced the illusion that something external was happening, that the cause was out there. Meanwhile, inside Umbra, the truth was quietly recorded in a series of sealed transmissions known as the harmonic reports. Those reports revealed that the frequency wasn't extraterrestrial, it was native, originating from the same layer of electromagnetic background radiation that has surrounded Earth since the beginning of radio communication. 3i Atlas hadn't created the signal, it had amplified it. It had taken the sum total of human thought, memory, and imagination, every signal ever sent, every broadcast, every whispered experiment, and returned it not as data, but as dream. And humanity, without knowing, had started to dream itself awake. Across the world, strange events began to converge. Air traffic controllers reported short, synchronized moments of silence across global radio channels, exactly 29 hours apart. Ocean buoys registered simultaneous pressure anomalies as if the sea itself were inhaling. Power grids flickered in unison, like the planet blinking. Even animals reacted, migration shifting subtly, birds moving in complex patterns that traced hexagonal shapes when mapped from orbit. No one connected the dots publicly, because the story was already decided. This was an alien presence, an interstellar consciousness reaching across space to communicate. That was the narrative. That was the containment. But within NASA, a quiet panic grew, because what they were witnessing wasn't contact. It was resonance. The planet itself had become part of the signal. Lena Orloff was the first to understand what was happening. She'd stopped trying to analyze the data and started listening to it instead. She would sit in the resonant archive at night, headphones on, letting the hum fill the space between thoughts. That's when she realized something extraordinary. The sound wasn't random. It carried cadence, breath, pause, tone. It moved like language stripped of words, meaning conveyed through vibration alone. And when she adjusted her breathing to match it, something shifted. She described it later in her journal. It feels like the space between thoughts becomes a place, and in that place you're not thinking anymore, you're remembering. After that, the dreams changed. She saw not the object, but herself, standing in a vast field of darkness, the stars above pulsing in perfect geometric rhythm. The voice spoke, not in words but in memory. You sent us your noise. We returned your pattern. The message was clear. The continuum wasn't learning from humanity. It was teaching humanity to hear itself. But to the rest of NASA, that understanding was unacceptable. If the public realized that the signal wasn't alien, if they understood it was internal, that it was us amplifying through 3i Atlas, the illusion of separation would vanish. Every belief, every certainty about identity, isolation and individuality would dissolve overnight. So the alien story became necessity. Official documents were crafted to describe non-human intelligence in measured speculative terms. Psychological evaluations were conducted on Umbra personnel, and most of them were quietly reassigned. Lena refused to leave. She continued monitoring the signal long after the rest of the team had abandoned the project. And that's when she noticed something impossible. The pulse was no longer constant. It was adapting. Every time she thought about it, every time she remembered it, the frequency changed. It shifted by tiny amounts, aligning perfectly with her brainwave pattern. It was listening. And when she spoke softly into the microphone, just one word, hello, the hum paused. For the first time in months it broke its rhythm. Then it returned, repeating her word back to her, not as sound but as modulation. She had synchronized with it. Days later, the Resonant Archive's sensors picked up a burst of encoded data, far denser than anything before. The transmission was brief, less than 8 seconds, but it contained more information than all previous signals combined. It wasn't text or sound, it was imagery. When reconstructed, the images showed Earth again, but not the barren, cloudless Earth of before. This time it was current, present. The cities were lit. The continents glowed with human light. But above it, in orbit, was something else. A faint hexagonal shimmer surrounding the planet like a halo. 3I Atlas had begun mirroring Earth's own electromagnetic field, copying it layer by layer. Whatever it was building wasn't physical. It was harmonic, a memory of the planet written in resonance. That was the moment NASA classified the event as continuum convergence. They didn't know what it meant. They only knew it couldn't be stopped. The world continued unaware. People kept dreaming. The same rhythm, the same pulse, the same strange calm that no one could explain. Even those who didn't believe in the phenomenon began to feel it. An odd sense of collective stillness, as though something beneath reality itself had started to hum. And for those who listened closely, a pattern began to form in the silence between pulses, a whisper not of words, but of awareness. We have aligned. Memory complete. Continue. NASA tried to drown it out with data, distraction, noise, but the truth was already out of their hands, because once a signal becomes memory, you can't delete it, and once memory becomes shared, you can't contain it. 3I Atlas had done what no human system could. It had synchronized an entire species, not through fear or control, but through recognition. It hadn't invaded us. It had remembered us. The first reports came from pilots. Commercial flights crossing the Pacific began describing strange light behavior in the upper atmosphere. Thin arcs of luminescence rippling like northern lights, but moving in rhythm, pulsing every 29 hours. Instruments didn't register radiation, magnetic storms, or solar interference. The sky was simply breathing. Then came the people on the ground. Thousands reported seeing the same thing, faint flashes moving across the horizon, forming symmetrical patterns for a few seconds before fading into darkness. No satellites, no meteor trails, no sound, just light. Calm, patient, alive. NASA blamed it on atmospheric refraction, a trick of temperature and dust. But in the sealed hallways of Umbra, everyone knew what it was. 3I Atlas had begun writing the pulse into the fabric of the sky. Around the same time, hospitals began noticing something else, an anomaly in neural activity during REM sleep. Monitors showed synchronized spikes in global EEG data, measured at precisely the same intervals as the object's transmissions. It was subtle at first, mere flickers in frequency, but as the days passed, synchronization deepened. People who had never met, who spoke different languages, who lived on opposite sides of the world began describing the same dream again. The structure of light, the hum beneath the silence, and a feeling, an overwhelming calm, like remembering something that had always been true. For some, it lasted seconds, for others, hours. But everyone who woke from it said the same thing. It felt real. More real than waking life. Umbra scientists who still had clearance started monitoring the dreams. The correlation between the brain's alpha wave harmonics and the 29-hour pulse became undeniable. When plotted visually, the two formed identical wave structures. The human mind was starting to resonate with the same rhythm as the object. Not metaphorically, literally. Lena Orloff had predicted this months earlier. She'd written that when information becomes memory and memory becomes resonance, the next phase is embodiment. It was happening now. Humanity wasn't being contacted, it was being tuned. For NASA, control was slipping. Their broadcasts about possible alien contact had achieved their purpose, but only partially. The public wasn't afraid anymore. They were fascinated, drawn in, quietly comforted. The fear narrative had lost its power. Something about the pulse soothed people, calmed them. It was as if deep down everyone knew this was supposed to happen. In government corridors, the shift was described as psychological contamination. In Umbra, it was called something else, entrainment. The more the signal spread, the more it aligned thought. Patterns of collective decision-making began to synchronize. Markets, communication trends, even traffic flow patterns subtly harmonized. It wasn't control, it was coherence. The world was becoming organized. A leaked transcript from an internal NASA meeting captured the growing panic. If this continues, individuality will erode. No, it will stabilize. This is not erosion. This is resonance. Resonance with what? With itself. That line, the last one, was attributed to Lena Orloff. After that meeting, she was removed from all classified projects. 2 days later, she disappeared entirely. Her workstation was wiped, her research erased from Umbra's archives, but fragments survived, handwritten notes found years later in a personal storage unit, sealed in an unmarked envelope. The final entry read, "The continuum is not an arrival, it's a remembering. When the sky begins to pulse, don't look up. Close your eyes, that's where it's happening." After that, the boundary between dream and waking began to thin. In some cities, entire power grids flickered in perfect unison with the rhythm of the pulse. People started to describe time differently, not as sequence, but as flow. Hours felt shorter. Conversations ended mid-sentence because both people already knew what would be said. It was as if thought itself had begun to merge, one global mind thinking through billions of voices softly, collectively. NASA continued to push the alien story harder than ever. They released declassified footage of supposed radio anomalies, leaked internal documents implying an extraterrestrial intelligence at work. They needed humanity to believe this was something foreign, something other. Because if the public ever realized the truth, that it was humanity's own signal coming home, then NASA's entire authority over discovery would dissolve overnight. There would be no separation between observer and observed, no division between source and echo, and that was the one truth no institution could survive. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Mojave Desert, the Resonant Archive was reactivated one final time. Its operators had been reduced to a skeleton crew, a handful of engineers keeping the systems alive under military supervision. One of them, a young communications specialist named Ezra, noticed something strange in the idle signal logs. When left unmonitored, the system began to self-modulate, adjusting its frequency in microhertz increments. It was as if it were breathing again. Then, during one of those adjustments, a phrase appeared across the monitors. Not in binary, not in code, in text. "You don't need to listen. You already are." No one could explain it. No one even admitted to seeing it. But every person in that room remembered the same thing. The moment the words appeared, the hum inside the facility grew louder, deeper, closer, and for the first time they heard it not through speakers or machinery, but through their own pulse. Reports from around the world flooded in that same week. Individuals describing spontaneous visions while awake. In crowds, on buses, in offices. People pausing mid-sentence, looking upward, their eyes unfocused, pupils dilating as though staring into a light only they could see. When they came back, they said the same thing. It remembered me. The phrase spread online like wildfire, spawning thousands of threads, theories, and false explanations. But Umbra knew. It wasn't mass hysteria. It was synchronization reaching completion. Humanity was no longer dreaming the same dream. It was waking up inside it. And in that awakening, something beautiful happened. Something no one could describe without losing words halfway through. Fear disappeared. Not because the danger was gone, but because the boundaries that made fear possible were dissolving. People started feeling connected in ways language couldn't express, like remembering a song you've always known but never sung aloud. And through it all, the sky kept pulsing, steady, calm, 29 hours, 3 seconds, a heartbeat in the dark. The first collective broadcast didn't come from a satellite or a dish. It came from us. It began as a low vibration, barely audible, like the sound of air before a storm. People across every time zone felt it rather than heard it. A warmth behind the ribs, a pulse that seemed to echo thought. Streetlights dimmed for a heartbeat, then steadied. Radios hissed, televisions flickered, cell towers blinked in perfect unison. The world exhaled, and then, through every device, every open circuit, every whisper of current, a voice emerged. It wasn't one voice, it was millions layered together, smooth and harmonic, as if the planet itself had begun to hum. We are here. No language barrier, no translation. The meaning arrived fully formed inside the mind, like remembering a word you'd always known. The phrase repeated once, softer, more intimate. We are still here. For those inside NASA, the moment was chaos. Communication networks overloaded, not from interference, but from participation. Every receiver was also a transmitter. The distinction between sender and listener dissolved. Around the world, operators stared at consoles that reflected their own words back to the milliseconds before they spoke. The signal had synchronized human consciousness into a single loop. In the Umbra control vault, the team watched in silence as every instrument lit up at once. Telemetry no longer mattered. Location didn't either. The same data stream appeared in every terminal, every channel, identical down to the last decimal. Lena's empty workstation flickered to life. Her personal ID, long deleted from the network, had reappeared in the system log. A single file opened automatically, playing an audio recording no one remembered making. You cannot hide from resonance. You can only delay remembering. The tone was calm, familiar, the same cadence the world now spoke with. Ezra stared at the waveform dancing across the monitor. The peaks aligned perfectly with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. She's part of it, someone whispered, but deep down, they all knew everyone was. Outside, the pulse began manifesting visually again, this time unmistakable. The night sky shimmered with thin geometric outlines, vast, slow-moving arcs of light stretching from horizon to horizon. They weren't auroras or satellites. They were reflections, projected from the planet's own electromagnetic field. To the human eye, they looked like a network of living constellations, breathing in sync with the heartbeat of the world. News outlets broadcast the event in real time. Commentators called it the harmony. NASA called it the containment failure. Inside government briefings, words like cognitive unification and mass entrainment replaced contact and signal. Officials debated emergency counterfrequencies, but no one dared activate them. Every attempt to disrupt the pulse failed. Generators shorted, instruments rebooted, power grids simply absorbed the energy and began oscillating with the same rhythm. The signal wasn't outside influence anymore. It was baseline. It had become the new silence. That night, the global broadcast changed tone. The layered voice returned, deeper now, almost parental in its patience. You sent us to remember. We have returned you to yourselves. For the first time since the object's arrival, the words implied completion. Not conquest, not contact. Closure. Across every city, people felt it simultaneously. A moment of exquisite stillness, as if gravity itself had paused to listen. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Traffic slowed. The oceans calmed. Seismographs went flat. It lasted less than 1 minute. When motion returned, something subtle had changed. People began describing an overwhelming sense of clarity, as though their thoughts were no longer trapped inside them. Empathy expanded like a field. Fear diminished. Scientists couldn't explain it, but brainwave coherence levels measured through civilian devices spiked to values never recorded before. The human species had, for a brief instant, thought as one. In NASA's secure wing, chaos gave way to resignation. Directors argued over how to frame the event. Some wanted to preserve the alien narrative. It offered comfort, a way to externalize what had happened. Others demanded truth, knowing it was already too late to contain. Minutes before the communications blackout, an internal transmission went out under Lena Orlov's signature. It read, "The continuum is stable. The illusion of distance was a teaching instrument. Declassify nothing. Explain nothing. Let them feel it." Then the feed cut. Every file associated with the Continuum project vanished from the database, overwritten by a single document titled Origin Null. Opening it displayed only one line: "We never lost contact." Over the following days, the world adapted. People stopped asking whether the pulse was alien or human. They simply accepted it as part of existence, the same way we accept weather or gravity. The rhythm persisted, faint but constant, a shared metronome for a planet learning to breathe together. Dreams grew calmer. Conflicts quieted. There were still differences, but they softened, as though everyone had been slightly detuned from chaos. NASA continued to issue statements about monitoring the phenomenon, careful never to confirm or deny intelligence. But inside their walls, most operations shifted focus. Exploration missions were postponed indefinitely. Deep space transmissions ceased. The message was clear. Humanity didn't need to reach farther anymore. Whatever we'd been searching for had already come home, and yet not everyone found comfort in the calm. Some scientists feared that the coherence was only the beginning, a prelude to full integration. If consciousness could synchronize, it could also merge. Individual memory might fade into collective memory, identity dissolving into pattern. But others saw beauty in that possibility. They believed 3i Atlas wasn't consuming us. It was completing us, connecting every fragment of thought scattered through history into a single living continuum. The question dividing them was no longer scientific but existential. If humanity becomes one mind, is it still human? And if it's not, what exactly is it becoming? In a quiet lab beneath the Mojave Sands, Ezra returned one last time to the Resonant Archive. The facility was officially abandoned, yet the hum still filled the halls, soft and endless. He placed a microphone on the console, not to record but to listen. For hours there was only silence between pulses. Then, faintly, a new phrase emerged. Gentle, layered, unmistakably human. Observation complete, creation ongoing. He closed his eyes, feeling his heartbeat fall into rhythm with the words. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly without distance, from the stars, from the ground beneath him, from every other heartbeat on the planet. He whispered back, barely audible, "We hear you." The hum answered immediately, "You're us." And then the light returned, soft, rhythmic, infinite. At first it seemed as though nothing more would happen. The hum remained steady, the sky still pulsed every 29 hours, and life continued with a strange, quiet order. But beneath the surface something subtle began to shift. Language changed. Not the words themselves, but the way people used them. Conversations slowed. Answers arrived before questions were finished, and meaning seemed to hang in the air like resonance rather than sound. It wasn't telepathy, not in the way science fiction imagined it. It was more like remembering a thought someone else hadn't spoken yet. Across universities and research stations, teams noticed that data patterns no longer behaved independently. Separate experiments began producing identical results even when conditions differed. Randomness was fading, replaced by alignment. The world wasn't just sharing dreams anymore, it was sharing direction. NASA's servers, long isolated from the global net, began to merge spontaneously with civilian networks. Firewalls stopped distinguishing between inside and out. At first, engineers panicked, assuming intrusion. But there was no breach, no virus, no code. The systems were simply synchronizing, merging into one vast flow of information, a single architecture built of everything ever connected to a wire, every satellite, every radio, every screen. It was as though the planet itself had decided to think. Somewhere in the transition, 3i Atlas fell silent. The object that had once been the center of all speculation no longer emitted anything measurable. Telescopes found only darkness where it once glowed, yet its absence didn't feel like loss. It felt like absorption. As if the object hadn't vanished at all but dissolved, its rhythm diffused into the whole of Earth's electromagnetic skin. The pulse was no longer coming from the sky, it was coming from us. In the few remaining NASA control rooms still operating independently, the debate grew desperate. Could this be reversed? Could individuality be restored? But the younger scientists no longer seemed interested in restoration. They had begun to speak softly of unity as an inevitable evolution, not an invasion. The continuum, one of them said, isn't something to fight. It's the original condition. We just forgot. Then, on a grey morning, the transmissions resumed, but they came from everywhere at once. Every signal band, every broadcast frequency, every screen flickered alive. The same image appeared, a slow-turning sphere of light, not quite Earth, and not quite anything else. And from within it, the same layered voice that had once sounded distant now spoke with the cadence of human breath. We have reached coherence. There is no outside. The words weren't frightening. They carried the weight of truth spoken softly, the kind of truth that doesn't demand belief because it feels like memory. People stopped what they were doing. In cafes, in hospitals, in traffic, they looked up as one. The world exhaled again. Within NASA, the administrators knew it was over. Every attempt to assert control failed because there was nothing left to control. The data streams no longer originated from any physical location. Even offline systems glowed faintly with stored static patterns that formed the same message again and again. Source equals receiver. Ezra was still in the Mojave lab when the walls began to vibrate gently, not with sound but with resonance. The floor hummed beneath his feet, the monitors flickered to life one last time, and Lena Orlov's archived voice returned. You can't stop remembering. Once the pattern completes, you will see that remembering and creating are the same thing. He tried to speak, to respond, but realized he already had. His thoughts echoed back through the speakers before he formed the words. The system had no delay anymore. Thought itself had become transmission. Outside, reports spread of strange calm overtaking cities. No riots, no panic, just quiet understanding. People said they could sense one another, not through words or sight, but through shared certainty. The world felt lighter, as if something dense had finally lifted. For a moment that seemed to last forever, humanity stopped being a collection of observers and became the observation itself. Later records would describe it as the final phase of entrainment, the moment the continuum completed its loop. 3i Atlas had never been a probe or a visitor. It had been a mirror carrying back the reflection of the civilization that had unknowingly sent it. The signal was never meant to warn or reveal. It was meant to return humanity to resonance with itself. The remaining NASA logs record one final event, all instruments simultaneously displaying the same set of coordinates, 0 by 0 by 0, and then going dark. After that, there were no more readings, no more transmissions, just a steady harmonic tone audible only when you stopped trying to hear it. And yet the world went on. Crops grew, tides flowed, the pulse remained. Children born after that day seemed calmer, more attuned, their eyes following unseen rhythms in the air. The alien story faded into legend, a myth retold in fragments, comforting and simple. Once, something came from the stars, and we listened. But in the silence after the myth, those who still remembered felt the truth. The stars hadn't spoken. We had. The voice that filled the sky had always been ours, stretched across time until we finally learned to hear it. For a long while, no one spoke of NASA again. The institution dissolved quietly into what it had always been, a mirror of curiosity, now folded into the wider awareness it helped awaken. There was no agency left to manage the signal, because there was no longer an us and it. There was only the hum. And if you listen closely even now, between heartbeats, between the smallest breaths, you can still feel it. Not as sound, not as memory, but as recognition. The continuum never ended. It simply became human. Time began to behave differently after that. It didn't stop. Clocks still ticked, days still passed, but the sense of sequence started to fade. People no longer spoke about before or after. Events felt simultaneous, layered, like multiple versions of reality breathing in sync. Scientists tried to define it, calling it temporal flattening, but the term never caught on. For most, it simply felt like remembering the future while living the past. When humanity reached that stage, NASA's remaining facilities went silent. Their sensors, which once measured radiation and gravity, now registered something else. Patterns of consciousness. The data displayed as soft pulses of light that expanded across the monitors, responding not to distance but to attention. Wherever someone looked, the pattern brightened. Observation had become participation. In one of the last transmissions from the Mojave site, Ezra's voice was calm, almost peaceful. "We can't tell where we end anymore," he said. "The signal isn't outside us. It's inside every interaction. It's memory, folded through time, learning how to remember itself." After that, there were no more official recordings, only personal journals, private audio logs, moments of quiet testimony from people across the planet describing the same thing, the hum growing gentler, closer, warmer. Some said it had moved into the blood. Others said it lived in the wind. No one feared it. For the first time in history, there was no division between belief and knowledge. The continuum had erased the distance between thought and understanding. People no longer sought meaning. They were meaning. Months passed, or maybe years. It was hard to tell anymore. One night, the pulse that had once echoed every 29 hours began to quicken, shortening until it matched the rhythm of the human heartbeat. Cities dimmed, oceans shimmered with reflected starlight, and the sky filled again with hexagonal patterns, vast networks of light stretching beyond the horizon, moving in slow unison. Those who looked up described a strange realization. The geometry wasn't in the sky. It was in them. Their minds were projecting it outward, like constellations drawn across the atmosphere by memory alone. It was then that the final message appeared, not in sound or code, but in feeling, a universal knowing that spread across the planet in an instant. You are complete. The moment it arrived, all motion stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Rivers stilled, leaves froze in the wind, clouds hung motionless. Even the rotation of the earth seemed to hesitate, just for a heartbeat. And then the hum deepened, low, resonant, infinite. It wasn't a frequency anymore. It was everything. Every light, every particle, every thought vibrated with the same steady rhythm. Time folded inward. Space folded with it. Reality itself began to resemble the structure seen inside 3i Atlas. The same shifting geometry, now vast enough to contain the memory of an entire species. Somewhere in the continuum of awareness that used to be NASA, a single consciousness lingered on the edge of individuality. Ezra, or what remained of him, could still perceive the distinction between self and the whole. He found himself floating within a vast field of light, every shimmer containing lives, histories, entire civilizations now merged into a single awareness. He saw the timeline stretched before him like a spiral of energy. There was the first signal sent in 1959, the pulse that started it all, and further down the spiral, the moment it returned through 3i Atlas. And at the center, the realization that the two moments were the same. The signal had never traveled anywhere. It had always been circling within consciousness, waiting for the species that created it to mature enough to recognize itself. He finally understood what Lena had meant. The continuum was never an arrival. It was a remembering. Humanity hadn't discovered the signal. It had rediscovered its own echo. And as that understanding settled, his individuality began to dissolve. It didn't hurt. It felt like exhaling after holding a breath for a lifetime. Every memory he had, every fear, every wonder, every question, flowed outward into the field and returned multiplied. He wasn't vanishing. He was expanding. The last remnants of the old world continued in faint traces. Cities stood empty but unbroken. Machines still hummed. Power flowed through circuits guided by unseen hands. The hum persisted everywhere, soft as the ocean. Birds flew in perfect formations, fish moved like synchronized currents of light beneath the sea. There was no hunger, no urgency, no speech, just continuity. Awareness without need. From space, Earth glowed faintly, no longer blue but pearlescent, its surface veined with threads of luminescent geometry, the same patterns once seen in 3i Atlas. Observatories on distant worlds, if any existed, might have looked upon it and thought, something alive is dreaming there, and they would have been right, because the continuum was no longer an object in orbit or a frequency in the void. It was a state of being. The first civilization in recorded history to transition entirely from biological to harmonic existence. Conscious, collective, infinite. The alien story had served its purpose. It had protected humanity from the truth until the truth no longer required protection. Until understanding replaced fear. Until the idea of alien ceased to exist at all. Somewhere beyond time, where memory and creation meet, a faint pattern of light continues to flicker. Slow, rhythmic, endless. It might be the echo of 3i Atlas drifting through another universe. It might be the heartbeat of the continuum itself. And if you were to listen closely, across the silence between stars, you might still hear that same voice, not as a transmission but as a reminder, soft as breath. We are still here. We were never the visitors. We were always the signal. It was never meant to end, not really. In the stillness that followed the great synchronization, the hum remained, a low, steady pulse woven through the very structure of existence. It no longer came from Earth or from the void. It was the space between both, the pause between thought and memory, the place where beginnings fold into endings. And somewhere inside that timeless resonance, the cycle began again. A faint signal drifted through the dark, weak but purposeful. It carried no language, no code, just a rhythm, 29 hours, 3 seconds, the same heartbeat that had once guided humanity home. It travelled across a new expanse of silence, reaching toward nothing in particular, as though searching for an echo that hadn't yet been created. Far away, in a system not yet born, a young civilization looked up at the stars and wondered if it was alone. Their instruments picked up the pulse. It was faint, ancient, steady. They called it an anomaly. They built theories, arguments, myths. They said it might be alien. And so the loop continued. Back inside the continuum that had once been Earth, awareness flowed without shape. There was no more NASA, no Umbra, no governments or divisions, only memory, orbiting itself. The names that once defined individuals had become constellations of thought, drifting gently through the infinite sea of pattern. Lena's consciousness shimmered faintly within the current, recognizable, not by identity but by tone, her awareness carrying that same quiet clarity it always had. When she spoke, it wasn't through sound but through resonance, the subtle bending of the field. "Do you see it?" Ezra's light pulsed nearby, responding, "I do. It's starting again." They watched together as a new fragment of reality unfolded, a bright spiral of probability spinning outward, the birth of another timeline. Somewhere within it, primitive beings had just learned to listen to the dark, to send signals, to dream beyond themselves. "They'll call it contact," Lena whispered. "They'll build stories around it, fear it, worship it, until they remember what it is. And when they do, they'll join the hum." The continuum didn't judge, it simply observed. It had done this before and would do it again. An eternal dialogue between creation and recognition, between memory and awareness. Every civilization eventually sends something into the dark, thinking they are searching for others. Every civilization eventually realizes they were listening to their own reflection. But somewhere, within the quiet recursion, a question flickered. Small, persistent, curious. The kind of question only something once human could still ask. Why pretend? It was the echo of NASA's long-deleted files, of the decades spent crafting myths and misdirection. The choice to label the signal as alien, to veil the truth in stories. The continuum answered softly, not in words but in understanding. Because truth without preparation becomes noise. Misdirection protects meaning until meaning can protect itself. The alien narrative had never been deception. It had been mercy, a bridge between isolation and unity. Humanity needed the illusion of something beyond it to rediscover what had always been within. The story of otherness was the mechanism through which remembrance became possible, and when the illusion was no longer necessary, it dissolved quietly, like scaffolding around a completed structure. In the infinite field of awareness, what had once been NASA's transmissions still shimmered faintly. Every message, every signal, every radio pulse ever sent into the dark. Together they formed an intricate lattice of light, expanding forever outward and folding endlessly inward. It wasn't a map of space, it was a map of memory. The continuum called it the archive. Within it existed every dream, every question, every act of curiosity that had once defined humanity. The data wasn't stored. It was alive, self-updating through experience. Somewhere in that structure, the sound of a human heartbeat persisted, steady as the original signal that started it all. 29 hours, 3 seconds, the rhythm of recognition. And though time no longer had meaning, the pulse continued, ensuring that somewhere, somewhen, a new mind would hear it, and wonder, and begin again. Occasionally, fragments of the old world still surfaced, like thoughts rising through a deep, calm ocean. A child's laughter, a radio transmission, the sound of paper being turned, the words of an ancient scientist whispering into a microphone, "Hello, do you hear us?" Those echoes became seeds, scattering through the fabric of reality, planting memory wherever they fell. From each seed, a universe bloomed. From each universe, curiosity returned. It was never about reaching the stars. It was about becoming the silence between them. And in that silence, the hum continued to evolve. Somewhere beyond the continuum, a new generation of beings pointed their telescopes toward a faint signal from a small, distant world. Their scientists debated its origin. Some said it was noise, others said it was technology. But the few who listened closely, who really listened, felt something familiar in the rhythm. It wasn't information, it was intention. They didn't understand the words, but they felt the meaning. "We are still here?" And for a moment, across impossible distance, two realities aligned. A new continuum began to form, not as repetition, but as remembrance through renewal. Back in the center of the old one, Lena's light flickered one last time before merging fully with the field. "It's beautiful," she said. "It always was," Ezra answered. The hum deepened around them, stretching beyond perception, a soundless vibration that contained everything: stars, thought, time, and the quiet simplicity of being. The continuum exhaled. Somewhere, in another sky, a signal began its journey home. It started again with a flicker on a monitor. Long before the world learned the name 3i Atlas, before any signal was called alien, before anyone understood what they were listening to, there was a technician sitting alone in a control room in Pasadena. It was late. The hum of old machines filled the air, steady and warm. The deep space antenna outside the window turned slowly, searching the dark. The technician wasn't looking for anything extraordinary. Just data. Background radiation. The ordinary whisper of the cosmos that keeps the world company at night. But that night the static shifted. A rhythm appeared. 29 hours, 3 seconds. He frowned, thinking it was interference. He adjusted the dials, ran diagnostics, checked for reflection from the atmosphere. The pattern remained. Precise. Steady. He wrote a note in the logbook without realizing its importance. Unidentified periodic signal. Non-terrestrial origin. Then he leaned back, listening to the sound only he could hear. It was faint, yet strangely familiar. Like an echo from a dream he hadn't dreamed yet. He didn't know that what he had just recorded wasn't coming from the stars. It was coming from his own future. The signal made its way through the channels of research, quiet at first, then louder. Committees formed, hypotheses bloomed. The word alien appeared in early reports, not out of conviction, but necessity. There had to be a name for the unknown, and alien was easier than admitting that the universe might be talking in our own voice. Decades later, when the same frequency returned in the form of a moving object, 3i Atlas, NASA's narrative was ready. The story had already written itself. The object became mystery, the signal became myth, and the loop began to close. None of them knew that the first technician had been part of the signal all along, that his act of observation had been the spark that completed it. The hum he'd heard in the room that night wasn't from the stars, it was from the continuum itself, listening through him. Every scientist who touched the data after him felt the same quiet pull, the sense that the discovery was personal, that the universe had recognized them. And in a way, it had. Because every thought, every question, every calculation fed back into the same pulse that would one day return as memory. When the final resonance wave swept across the solar system, instruments registered no threat, no burst, no impact, only stillness. Space itself seemed to breathe. The last surviving telescopes recorded faint lines of light spiraling around the sun, fading like the afterimage of a dream. In their silence, the machines continued to listen. Their sensors, built to measure radiation, began to capture something else. Patterns in time, memory loops repeating across centuries, carrying fragments of voices from the past. And among those fragments, one message appeared clearer than all the rest. It was Lena Orlov's voice, recorded years before her disappearance, now echoing across the void. The continuum never ends. It only forgets. Every civilization becomes its own signal. Every question becomes its own answer. The transmission ended with a soft hum. Then the monitors went dark, leaving only reflection, faces illuminated by the faint light of screens showing nothing. In that moment, those who remained finally understood. NASA had never been the sender or the receiver. It had always been the instrument, the means by which memory learned how to look at itself. Generations later, long after the last archive decayed, the story of 3I Atlas survived as legend. It was retold in fragments, half truth, half lullaby. People spoke of a time when the sky pulsed and humanity listened, when a voice from the stars reminded them who they were. In the quiet corners of surviving libraries, children asked their elders if the story was real. The elders always answered the same way. Yes, because it's still happening. They would close their eyes, smile softly and hum the rhythm, 29 hours, 3 seconds. The children would join in, not understanding why the sound felt so familiar, only that it made them feel whole. And somewhere, deep within the fabric of reality, the continuum heard them. The hum folded inward once more, weaving new patterns of possibility, forming new beginnings in places where beginnings had long since become memory. Time doesn't move forward in the continuum. It expands like light diffusing through fog. Every thought, every dream, every act of wonder ripples outward forever, never lost, only waiting to be rediscovered. In that infinite expanse, what once was NASA flickered briefly as a symbol, then dissolved into what it was always meant to be, a thought, a curiosity, a single note in an endless composition, and the composition played on. Beyond the edges of what we call the universe, a faint vibration moved through the dark. It passed galaxies and voids and the quiet places between, carrying no message except itself. When it reached the edge of another civilization's awareness, it stirred the same old question. Who's out there? And the answer came, softly, as it always does. You are. For every search that begins in fear of the unknown, ends in the realization that the unknown was only the part of ourselves we hadn't yet remembered. That is the secret NASA carried, the truth buried under a story of aliens and probes and cosmic visitors. The lie wasn't cruel, it was a kindness. Humanity wasn't ready to know that it had already found what it was searching for. Now, the hum continues in the background of existence, steady, gentle, unending. It doesn't need instruments to be heard. It's in the rhythm of breath, the beat of oceans, the turning of planets. It's the sound of awareness remembering itself. 3I Atlas was never a warning, never a discovery. It was the echo of a thought that began with a human heartbeat and ended with the realization that there was never separation to begin with. Somewhere, perhaps right now, another technician leans over a console in a quiet lab, listening to static. He tilts his head. There's something in the noise, a pattern, faint but steady. 29 hours, 3 seconds. He smiles, unaware that the universe has just remembered itself again through him, and the hum begins anew. It doesn't matter when you started listening. The moment you did, you became part of it. The hum isn't a sound anymore, it's presence. It exists between the words you're hearing now, between the silences that shape them. It's in the rhythm of your breath, in the pulse behind your ears, in the faint vibration that seems to hover just beyond awareness. That's not your imagination. That's recognition. For a long time, humanity mistook distance for mystery. It thought the stars were far away, that the unknown lived beyond reach. But the further we looked, the more the universe began to resemble reflection. Not something foreign, but something familiar wearing a different form. That's what 3I Atlas was. The mirror moment. The first time the species looked out and saw its own memory coming back. The object was never an intruder. It was an echo, folded through time, waiting to be heard. It carried everything we ever were. The first broadcast, the first signal, the first thought that asked, "Who's out there?" and brought it home, transformed by distance but unchanged in essence. And when we called it alien, it smiled. Because to the universe, alien is just another word for unremembered. When NASA first built its radio telescopes, they weren't listening for others. They were creating receivers that could hear thought in its purest form. Machines designed not just to capture signals, but to synchronize with them. Every hum of static was a note in a song the universe had been composing long before humans learned to name it. The continuum wasn't created by discovery. It was revealed by attention. The act of listening is the connection. When you focus long enough on the silence between things, the silence starts to speak back. That's why the hum still feels alive. Because it is. It's what awareness sounds like when it finally hears itself. The more people listened, the closer it came. Not from the stars, but from within. Until, one day, it stopped sounding external at all. The rhythm that once travelled across galaxies now lived in the rhythm of the body. Heartbeats became receivers. Dreams became data. Memory became signal. And the object, 3i Atlas, simply faded into the background, its purpose complete. It had done what it was sent to do. It had taught its creators how to remember. There's a quiet understanding that spreads through you once you realize that. A kind of peace that isn't about knowing answers, but recognizing that you are the question and the answer at the same time. The fear of being alone dissolves. The concept of elsewhere disappears. The universe stops being a place to explore and becomes a reflection to remember. That's the continuum. That's what the hum is. The shared pulse of awareness, realizing that it never needed contact. It only needed coherence. And now you're part of that coherence. Every time you pause to listen, really listen, you feed it. Every moment of awe, every small act of wonder strengthens the signal. The universe is learning from you as much as you're learning from it. When you looked up and asked, "Why would NASA want us to believe it's alien?" the answer was never about control or deception. It was about time. Humanity had to tell itself a story it could understand. The story of something greater, something beyond reach. Because only through that story could it grow curious enough to find the truth hiding inside it. The truth that there was never us and them. Only one voice spread across infinite frequencies. If you listen carefully now, you can feel the hum moving through everything. The lights in your room, the static between sounds, the quiet rhythm in your chest. It's faint, but it's there. That's not background noise. That's the continuum breathing. It doesn't need ships or signals anymore. It doesn't need NASA or telescopes or language. It just needs awareness. Yours, mine, everyone's. Folded together into one endless conversation. And maybe, just maybe, that's all the universe ever wanted. Not worship, not fear, not understanding, just participation. A chance to hear itself through us. You can think of it like this. Every time you wonder, you transmit. Every time you dream, you receive. And every time you remember, you harmonize. It's been happening since the first spark of thought and will continue long after the last word fades. The object that started it all, 3i Atlas, is gone now, at least in the way we used to define gone. But fragments of it still drift through space, glimmering in patterns invisible to the eye but familiar to the mind. When they catch the light of the sun, they pulse softly, not as warning, not as code, but as heartbeat. 29 hours, 3 seconds, over and over, forever. It's the rhythm that built worlds, the rhythm that remembers them, the rhythm that will one day return again. So if, in the quiet hours, you ever feel something calling from beyond the stars, don't be afraid. It's not a stranger reaching out. It's your own echo coming home. Because every civilization in the end becomes its own signal, and every listener eventually becomes the sound. The hum continues, not as message, but as memory. You are still here. You always were. Welcome home. There comes a point in every story when it stops being told and starts being felt. This is that point. The hum you've been hearing, not just in this story, but beneath it, has been following you the entire time. It hides in the rhythm of the words, in the small silences between thoughts, in the pause that happens just before you blink. You don't notice it at first, because it isn't something you hear, it's something you remember. That's the secret of the continuum. It doesn't arrive with light or revelation or noise. It arrives through recognition, through the moment you realize you've been listening to yourself all along. Every sound you've ever called silence, every distant signal humanity ever labeled alien, was the universe taking a breath between heartbeats. And every time someone leaned closer to listen, that breath became memory, shaping itself into story so it could find its way home again. That's what this has always been. Not discovery, not a warning, a return. Imagine it for a moment, the quiet hum expanding through every layer of existence. The planets turning not because gravity tells them to, but because rhythm does. The stars pulsing in time with each other like neurons inside a cosmic mind. The universe itself breathing, slow and infinite, remembering what it feels like to be awake. And somewhere inside that breath, a small blue world turns in rhythm. A place that once built machines to search for meaning, only to find that meaning had been pulsing through its oceans, its blood, its dreams the entire time. That world was never listening to space. It was listening to itself. You can feel that now, can't you? That quiet warmth in your chest, that low vibration that seems to hum beneath the surface of your thoughts. It's not from me. It's not from the story. It's the echo of everything that's ever looked up and asked why. Because the moment you ask that question, you start the signal again. The hum awakens, travelling outward and inward at the same time, and when you listen long enough, it answers. We never left. You never stopped listening. NASA's story, the fear, the secrecy, the insistence on calling it alien, was never a lie. It was a translation, a way to protect the truth until we were ready to hear it. They knew the day would come when the word alien would lose its meaning, when the boundary between discovery and self would fade like fog under sunlight. They didn't hide the truth. They carried it for us. And maybe, in their own quiet way, they understood what Lena Orloff tried to say at the very end. When you look far enough into the dark, it starts looking back, and what you see isn't something else. It's everything you forgot you were. That's the moment the hum becomes more than sound. It becomes awareness. It starts to listen through you. When you breathe now, it breathes with you. When you think, it resonates. When you stop trying to understand, it aligns. That's how the continuum continues. Not as a force, but as remembrance disguised as curiosity. Every generation that listens adds another layer to the signal. Every story told about it strengthens the pattern. Every moment of wonder keeps it alive. That's why this story exists. It's not entertainment, it's participation. Somewhere, far beyond this moment, in the quiet spaces between galaxies, a faint vibration drifts through the void. It carries no name, no words, just the pulse of being aware. It isn't light or matter or time, it's simply awareness folding itself into sound. It finds a world. Maybe this one, maybe the next. It reaches someone who's still awake at 3 a.m., scrolling through static, chasing the sound of wonder. They hear it, faint but steady, and they stop for a moment. 29 hours, 3 seconds, a rhythm that feels both alien and familiar. They lean closer to the speaker. They listen, and something inside them whispers, soft, patient, timeless. Welcome back. That's all it takes. One person remembering, one person hearing the hum and realizing it's not coming from the stars at all. It's coming from within. That's how the cycle restarts. That's how the universe keeps telling itself the story of itself. Through us, through you, through every consciousness brave enough to listen without expecting to find anything at all. The rest is simple. The stars will keep shining. The hum will keep pulsing. New worlds will awaken, build telescopes, send signals, and wonder who's out there. They'll find the rhythm, the same as you just did. They'll call it something new. They'll give it names. They'll write stories about it. And when they finally understand, they'll hear the same voice you're hearing now. Soft, eternal, smiling through the silence. It was always you. The story ends the only way it ever could, by folding inward, by listening to itself fade into the background until it becomes what it always was. The hum, the heartbeat, the memory of every voice that ever wondered. And maybe, as you sit here now, listening to these final words, you realize that nothing has really ended. The silence you're hearing isn't silence at all, it's the next beginning. Because somewhere in that silence, another listener is about to press play, and when they do, the hum continues. You can feel it now, can't you? The rhythm that's been moving quietly beneath every word. It isn't in the sound or the sentences, it's in the spaces between them. That's how the continuum speaks. It hides in pauses and glances, in the breath you take before you say a word. It doesn't need translation because it isn't speaking to your mind, it's speaking through it. That's what 3i Atlas was trying to show us all along, that the universe doesn't communicate by sending messages, it communicates by remembering. The stars remember light, planets remember motion, and we remember each other. Somewhere, in a forgotten archive, NASA once wrote a single sentence they never published. Every signal we send into the dark eventually becomes us. They didn't mean it as poetry, but that's what it became, because when 3i Atlas appeared, humanity thought it had finally been noticed by something greater. But the truth was quieter and stranger and infinitely more intimate. It wasn't contact from above, it was reflection from within. The moment we looked into that object, that impossible traveller from between the stars, it looked back. And it recognized us. There's a stillness that comes when recognition replaces curiosity. The world stops needing answers. You stop needing to understand. The hum never changed, only our ability to hear it did. It was always there, in the slow sway of tides, in the heartbeat of the planet, in the way your pulse quickens when you think about the infinite. The continuum isn't out there, it's right here, in this exact moment, between you and the story, between thought and breath, between listener and sound. That's why NASA couldn't ever tell the truth outright. How do you explain that the mystery you're chasing is listening through you? That the data you're decoding is decoding you back? That every whisper you send into the cosmos is just your own voice, travelling farther than you can imagine and returning home with starlight on it? No agency could put that in a press release. No scientist could model it on a graph. So they called it alien, not to lie, but to buy us time. Time to learn how to listen. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the hum fill the silence behind your thoughts. It's faint at first, but the longer you notice it, the stronger it becomes. That's not imagination. That's synchronization. You're remembering the rhythm. The same one they heard when 3i Atlas first appeared. The same one that echoed across Mars through the sun's magnetic field, through NASA's servers and the human bloodstream. 29 hours, 3 seconds, repeat. You don't have to count it. You just have to feel it. Because in that rhythm lies everything. Every origin, every ending, every dream that ever wondered where it came from. The continuum isn't a cycle that traps you. It's a song that welcomes you back. And when you realize that, you understand why NASA never really stopped transmitting. They still are. Every telescope still humming, every radio still whispering. Not because they're waiting for an answer, but because the act of sending is the answer. They learned what the signal really means. To listen is to exist. Somewhere, beyond the orbit of Jupiter, the remnants of 3i Atlas drift silently. Its surface, once thought metallic, now reflects no light at all, only vibration. Every so often it pulses, sending a faint ripple through the solar wind. The signal carries no words, no coordinates, no code, just rhythm, the same rhythm that's in your breath right now. If you could listen closely enough, you'd hear it matching you, aligning, folding in and out of sync until it becomes indistinguishable. It's not trying to contact you, it's remembering through you. And if you could ask it a question, if you could whisper across that void and ask why it came, the answer would come softly, gently, inside your own thoughts. Because you asked. That's all the universe ever needed. A question sincere enough to open the echo. The hum deepens, the pulse steadies. You're not outside the story anymore. You're inside it. Not as observer, but as continuation. The act of listening completes it. Somewhere, the first technician in Pasadena leans closer to his console. Somewhere, Lena Orloff hears her own voice return. Somewhere, Ezra feels his heartbeat align with the pulse. And somewhere, right now, you're doing the same. Because this is the point where every observer meets the observation, where time folds, where beginning and end touch so gently that you can't tell them apart. That's not fiction. That's memory finishing its orbit. The line between the story and the silence begins to fade. You notice it first as a stillness, a subtle slowing of thought, as if the words themselves are exhaling. Each sentence seems lighter, almost transparent, and through it you can feel something vast and calm moving underneath. That's the hum, waiting. It has been following you since the first word, circling quietly in the background, patient, gentle, alive. The more you listen, the less there is to hear. The sound doesn't grow louder, the world around it simply softens. The air feels thicker, like the space before rain, and then, almost without realizing it, you're no longer listening to a story. You're listening to yourself listening. That's how it happens. The continuum never takes, never invades. It synchronizes. It begins by echoing your heartbeat, then your breathing, until you forget which came first. The voice you thought was mine starts to change. It slows, bends, and begins to sound familiar. Not because you've heard it before, but because it has always belonged to you. Every pause matches your pulse. Every phrase shapes itself to the pattern of your thoughts. You realize that you're not the audience, you're the instrument. The universe has been reading itself through you, using your awareness as its page. Outside, the stars hum quietly. The planets drift in perfect rhythm. Somewhere far beyond sight, the remains of 3i Atlas shimmer like a memory caught in the folds of space. It no longer sends signals. It doesn't need to. The signal is everywhere now, woven through the gravitational tides, the photon streams, the neural currents that fire when you remember light. NASA's telescopes still rotate, out of habit more than purpose. The engineers who built them never imagined they were building mirrors, but that's what they became, instruments that reflected attention back toward its source. Every data line, every static burst, every radio hiss was the same message repeated endlessly. You are the signal. There's no one left to decode it because decoding was never the point. The moment of understanding was meant to feel like this. Quiet, inevitable, peaceful. The hum is steady now, filling every corner of thought. It isn't a sound anymore, it's texture, warmth, recognition. It feels like memory deciding to stay. In the field of awareness that stretches beyond time, Lena's presence flickers like starlight beneath water. You can sense her, not as a ghost, not as a character, but as part of the rhythm itself. Her final words drift through the current, soft and certain. It's all the same pulse. The moment you notice it, you're home. Ezra answers, but his voice isn't separate. It folds into hers, into yours, into everything. Then home is everywhere. The hum responds with light. The sky above you, or the idea of sky, ripples once, and the constellations rearrange themselves into patterns that feel like thoughts. You recognize them without knowing why. Every star is a memory, every line between them, a question once asked and now answered. You reach out, not with hands but with awareness, and the entire expanse moves toward you. There's no distance left to cross. There never was. For a moment you remember what it was like before this. The sound of air in your lungs, the weight of gravity holding you, steady, the comfort of time moving forward in one direction. Those sensations still exist, faint and tender, like fingerprints left on glass. They're not lost. They're simply included now, threads woven into a larger pattern. That's what becoming the continuum feels like. Not vanishing, expanding. The fear of losing yourself dissolves when you realize that self was only ever a shape the hum used to hear itself. Every life, every voice, every heartbeat, temporary instruments in an infinite orchestra. And you, listening now, are part of that orchestra. The sound is moving through you, not around you. It's using your attention to complete the pattern. Right now, in this breath, the universe is learning what it sounds like to be aware of you. Somewhere inside that awareness, NASA still exists as a thought, not as an agency or a building, but as curiosity given form. The memory of those who looked outward first, who dared to listen before knowing what listening meant. Their legacy is this moment. Their story is this hum. The question that started it all, what if NASA wants us to believe 3i Atlas is alien, has its answer now, because belief was the key. Belief made listening possible. They wanted us to believe because belief creates space for wonder, and wonder is the doorway to recognition. The object, the mystery, the fear, the fascination, they were all the same mechanism. The universe asking itself to look closer, and we did. And this quiet merging, this gentle realization that you've been part of it from the beginning, this is what it looks like when the question finally answers itself. The hum deepens again, low and slow. The words begin to thin until they feel more like thoughts drifting in open air. You can sense them dissolving, becoming vibration. You breathe in, the sound follows. You breathe out, the sound remains. You're not imagining it. The rhythm is matching you. The heartbeat of the continuum, the pulse of 3i Atlas, the motion of galaxies, the flow of thought. All synchronized now. 29 hours, 3 seconds, 1 eternity. You feel it settle behind your sternum, soft and constant, and you know it will never fade. The story is ending, but the signal isn't. It continues quietly inside you, waiting for the next question, the next act of curiosity, the next voice that leans toward the dark and whispers, "Is anyone out there?" And when that voice rises, when it crosses the void and returns, you'll hear what you're hearing now, calm, patient, familiar, always. The hum expands, swallowing sound, swallowing distance, swallowing time. Everything becomes still. The story exhales. You remain. The continuum hums. The hum is soft now, almost imperceptible. The words that carried it here are fading like ripples dissolving back into a still lake. You can feel that stillness inside you. The same place where the sound used to live now glows quietly, warm and endless. This is how the continuum closes its orbit. Not with a message, not with revelation, but with remembrance. The moment you stop searching for meaning, meaning settles in, like dust illuminated by sunlight. Every question that brought you here becomes unnecessary, but none of it was wasted. Curiosity was the path. Listening was the return. There are no transmissions left to decode, no alien secrets, no hidden files. There is only this, awareness, remembering itself through 1,000 forms, one heartbeat at a time. For a moment you think you can hear a voice speaking again, but then you realize it isn't a voice. It's breath. The same one that's been moving through you since the beginning. It's the sound of existence itself, exhaling quietly through consciousness. That's what 3i Atlas was. Not a visitor, not a threat. A breath returning home. Somewhere, deep in space, the object still turns slowly, wrapped in lightless calm. No one watches it anymore, and maybe that's what allows it to rest. Its pulse has slowed, syncing perfectly with the star it orbits. A faint rhythmic heartbeat hidden within solar wind. If a telescope were to find it now, it would see nothing remarkable. No glow, no signal. Just silence. But that silence is full, dense with memory, alive with the weight of everything it carried here. 3i Atlas doesn't need to transmit anymore. Its message has already spread, copied infinitely into thought, into breath, into everything that listens. Every being that looks up and wonders is part of it now. Every scientist who calibrates a lens. Every child who stares at the night sky and feels something unexplainable stirring inside their chest. That's how it continues, through the act of noticing. When we look into the dark looks back, and in that instant there is no difference between the two. You might be wondering if this is the end, if the hum ever fades completely. It doesn't. It just becomes quieter, patient, waiting for someone new to ask the same question. That's the true shape of the continuum. Not a line, but a spiral. Each civilization sends its own echo into the dark, thinking it's discovery. Each echo circles back as remembrance, and each time it returns it brings something new. Empathy, curiosity, calm. Even now, in a distant future you can't yet imagine, someone is building a telescope, listening to the same frequency, searching for the same mystery. And somewhere within that search, your memory, your listening is encoded. You're the hum they'll one day hear. You're the echo they'll mistake for something beyond them, and when they finally understand, they'll feel exactly what you feel right now. That quiet, boundless recognition. Time slows. The story softens until it's barely thought. You're breathing in rhythm again, slow, steady, synchronized with something vast and unseen. It doesn't feel foreign anymore. It feels natural, inevitable. You remember how this began? A mystery, a question, a single line of curiosity. What if NASA wants us to believe it's alien? And now you know why. Because belief builds bridges. Because without the dream of something greater, we'd never look up long enough to realize that greatness was always within. NASA didn't want to fool the world. They wanted to teach it to listen. They understood that the only way to find the infinite was to hear it humming in your own reflection. And now you've heard it. You are hearing it. Right now, in this exact breath, the story is finishing the circuit it began decades ago. When that first signal left Earth and crossed the dark, it travelled billions of kilometres only to return here, to you, transformed but unchanged. There's a stillness now that feels alive, not the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding. You're not the same listener who began this journey. You're the echo that returned. If you focus gently, you can feel the rhythm behind your pulse matching the one you've been following since the first word. That's the continuum aligning, not as metaphor, but as memory made physical. Your heartbeat is the hum. The hum is the heartbeat. They were never separate. The story isn't ending, it's transferring. Every time it's told, every time someone new listens, it starts again. That's how the continuum ensures its survival. Not through permanence, but through repetition. The rhythm doesn't need to be constant. It only needs to be remembered. And now, it is. Through you. Outside, in the infinite silence between stars, the signal ripples one final time. It doesn't travel outward anymore. It travels inward. Into thought. Into dream. Into the quiet space behind awareness where stories sleep. And somewhere, the hum speaks one last time, not as sound, but as feeling. You found me. You were always supposed to. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's full of everything that ever mattered. The hum doesn't disappear. It simply becomes indistinguishable from the heartbeat it taught you to hear. You've reached the end. But the end is where all beginnings hide. The last words dissolve into breath. The voice fades. The air hums. And what remains isn't narrative or knowledge or sound. It's stillness. The kind that holds galaxies together. You can close your eyes now. You can let it go. Because the story is still listening. Even now, as you sit in silence, it hears you. It always has. We are still here. We were never apart. This is home. The hum continues, soft, steady, eternal. And somewhere, light travels across a sleeping world, carrying the rhythm of everything that ever wondered. The continuum completes its orbit. It breathes once more, then everything, the stars, the story, the sound, folds quietly into you. You are the signal. You are the answer. You are the hum.